Thank you. Very nice talks. And I have one question to Onoshik, because always we have segregation. We know that we have a kind of competition between enthalpy and entropy. If I can, my question is, can we look that way in your case? So enthalpy is winning, that's why you have segregation?
You are 100% correct, but actually in biological molecules, that's true for protein, and it is true for the case of genome folding of chromatin, is that the balance between two things are very, very small. So it's very hard to compute exactly, because you don't want this molecule to be totally rigid, otherwise they cannot function. So you want to have enough stability. So you want to have enough of this enthalpy, but what we call enthalpy is effective because you have all solvation effects and middle effect. But this term we call energy. You have to be enough to beat this configuration entropy, but not by too much, because you have to be able to move between the fold and unfold. That's what makes this field very, very complicated to compute. That's what makes structure prediction, protein folding very complicated. Here in this case, since we have a molecule that's a little bit more fluid, it's a little bit easier to predict the structure. But in all these fields, that's the nightmare of the prediction. Because a lot of these molecules, they are disordered until something appears and changes that energy term by a little bit, and it folds to become functional.
Okay, and a short question to the personalized medicine, because we hear that medicine is advancing a lot, so we never were so advanced, but it's being not so much available to people because it's cost prohibitive. So my question is, will personalized medicine make things more available to people, you think?
Yes, you're right. Already now in developed countries that have a very good insurance, national insurance, health national insurance, people are spending out of their pocket about 40% for health, at least in Israel, which has a very good national insurance, and it rose from about 20% about 20 years ago to 40 nowadays. And the technologies are becoming very expensive, and you know, CAT scan, MRI, all the imaging, and of course the sequencing and the analysis will become very expensive. The pharmaceutical company, on the average, putting a drug into the market, an average drug these days is about $5 to $10 billion. And the companies are very sensitive to legal suits, and there are many legal suits that are running around, and actually most of the drugs that are being developed are flushed to the sink at phase 3 clinical trials. So they get all the way, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars until the clinical trial costs billions, and at the very end, when they open the envelope, it turns out that the drug is not better than a drug that is already available. Just a drug for Alzheimer's was flushed down the sink a few days ago. I just read it in Science 2 days ago. So it's going to be costly, indeed, and this is another, I didn't have time to talk about it, major bioethical concern already, even without personalized medicine. Think about how many MRIs, you know, there is a standard now, how many MRIs you need per 1,000 people in developed countries. You will find out that even in Europe, you go to the Balkans, you will find that the number is tenfold lower than required. Functional MRIs, and so on and so forth. Vaccinations, and so on and so forth. So unfortunately, this is another issue where science and technology far exceeds the needs of society, the true needs of society. And we should pay very careful attention to it, because all our achievements, at the end of the day, are going to be aimed at a very thin layer of us.
Okay, we have many questions. So Martin first.
I'd like to ask about transplants and whether it's realistic to have xenotransplantation or to grow organs from stem cells or something. I ask this because it seems to me there's a slight ethical ambivalence even about the best kind of transplants. For instance, one sees on British television some mother saying she's got a sick child and she's desperate for a donor, which means she's desperate for another child to be killed in an accident to provide the organs. And that's an intrinsic ambivalence. And I just wonder what the prospects are of using animals or artificial organs.
Yeah. At the moment, there's a research that is making the pig human in its genome. So we all have natural antibodies to the pig. There's a sugar molecule on the pig's blood vessels that's immediately detectable, and it would cause a coagulation of the organ immediately. But the pigs have been genetically manipulated now by two elements. One, there's a porcine virus that would be readily transmissible, and that's been eradicated. And so that's a very important development. The second aspect of it is that the organs can be transplanted without an immediate rejection. And the customary immunosuppression that is used for allotransplantation, that is from human to human, that can be successful. The clinical trials are not yet, but they will be soon happening. It goes to your point about how widely distributable this would be. And I don't know that in any time soon. So, Martin, the research is taking us to something in proximity of pig transplants being done, but I don't know how widely it would be distributable in the very many places of this world. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Aaron Siakanover. Aaron, I would suspect that the personalized medicine relies heavily on the possibility of being able to predict a phenotype from genotype. And it is my understanding that predicting complex disease, even having the genomic information available, is very difficult. Are we witnessing any progress in that? Of course, the breast cancer that you mentioned, I understand, is an exception. It is more or less easy to predict based on genetic information. But what about neurodegenerative diseases and so on?
Breast is indeed relatively easy. Other organs, as I mentioned, are much more difficult. But in NDD, in neurodegenerative diseases, I feel that the solution is going to be different. Most of the neurodegenerative diseases are due to problems in protein quality control, aggregation. If it's tauopathies in Alzheimer's, if it's synucleopathies in Parkinson, if it's other aggregates. And the problem will be to dissolve them, and there are several approaches that are being used now in order to try either overexpression of chaperones and so on. It's still far away. It's still far away, but I think that we are getting there. So each group of diseases will need a different approach. Right. I just wanted to, on the question of Martin about transplantation, there is no doubt that current transplantation technology with life use of immunosuppressive will never be sufficient, the number of the organs, and we need to go to engineered pigs, as was just mentioned, but even further that, to engineer the organs, and I think that you cannot predict how far away it is, but starting, we already are able to synthesize cells from the very beginning, cells that will not express MHC molecule that cause the immune system to recognize and to reject them. And I think that in between stem cells and complete synthetic biology, I think that the future of synthetically made artificial organs may be in the horizon, So I think that it's moving stepwise. It's moving stepwise.
But only can be open to a sliver. Just add one small comment here. I'm sorry about interrupting. I think the problem here is a little bit deeper. Just one thing is that when you do personalized medicine, that's another field you're working on, the omics and big data, is that organs are heterogeneous. So when you start to get people say which cell you get, so we have been doing studies these days where you get 3 cells from a particular individual and 3 cells from a particular individual and see now can you separate the 3, and we have a big hard time on today's world dealing with data. So heterogeneity is going to be a big problem that we have to deal with it, and just want to point a word of caution here.
This is a question about what responsibility we as scientists have for living up to what the Pope called on us in his address today, to step up to St. Paul's call for the charity of knowledge. It seems to me, not just across the medical cases we've seen, but across the energy ones earlier, we have increasingly a push for knowledge to be privatized in two ways. Most, increasing fraction of the research funding comes from corporations, not from the public. And in the case of the development, as opposed to the basic research, there's a very heavy pull from those who can to push through development, through phase 3 clinical trials and so on, those goods that can be paid for by a public. So this means science can advance marvelously, but increasingly, it seems to me, relative to even what we were doing 20 or 30 years ago with the first antibiotics, the Green Revolution, and so on, science and technology are being pushed to serve the most well-off, and we're losing our mechanisms for assuring this charity of knowledge that science and technology are done in ways that benefit those who are least well-off. What ought we to be doing on the whole range of things, from journals that lock up our results in places that 99% of the world can't afford to get to patents on the technologies we deliver, to decreased government funding of public good R&D? What should we do as individuals?
Can I just make a comment there? That's a very complicated ethical question, okay? And I have been working other part of my life doing modeling of cancer. And give a good example, immunotherapy these days. These drugs are awfully expensive and very few people have access. Now, and these drugs actually work. For a lot of people, that means life or death. The question is, these drugs wouldn't be developed if it was not for private investment. So in a sense, the governments are not coming up to the range of putting the investment. So if it was not for private investment, we wouldn't have these drugs. But at the same time, when they make available, now there's a big push of people not trying to use it. If you try to get, for example, some of these drugs are $1 million, $2 million treatment, and insurance companies are going to give you the runaround as much as they can to give things around. So I think that's a major ethical question. I think there's a study coming out now. The fact is, development of these new drugs require private enterprise, at least on the current society we have. But the question is, there are all the problems of being developed by private societies and patents, and how we deal with that dilemma is a very... Exactly. That's correct.
Just wanted to make a comment here. I just wanted to make a comment. A general comment, which I think is important to sit down and think soberly about this. Chronic degenerative diseases are going to continue existing as we live longer. There is absolutely no doubt of that, and we have to do research in order to tackle those problems. But long before we reach that situation, there is an enormous amount that can be done in terms of prevention and early detection. And society would benefit from that much more if we do it that way than if we just wait for the chronic degenerative diseases to come one at a time, several together, and we have a population which is very ill at an earlier and earlier age. I have been working with cancer in the last 5 years of my life, and I have been surprised to the amount of money we are pouring into cancer research when it's evident that we can do so much in terms of prevention, early detection of the disease with the intention of cure. 40% of the cancers are preventable, and if we early detect and treat with the intention of cure, we can cure another 20% of the cancers. If we get rid of 60% of the cancers, then we can have a manageable burden of disease that we can tackle. I'm not against doing the sophisticated research, but I am advocating for the fact that we have to change course. We have to really think about prevention and early detection. Of the $2.5 trillion a year that costs the treatment of cancer in the world, less than 3% is dedicated to programs of prevention and early detection. And that is impossible to continue paying for the other end of the activity.
That comment is quite apt for organ transplants as well, Salvador. That comment is very apt for organ transplantation as well. Preventive medicine. Prevent organ failure, and it's doable.
Yeah.
To concur with Salvador Moncada, we just wrote a very short paper to Science along with David Baltimore about investment in the brain. And we said, you know, the world is, both in Europe and in the United States, are investing huge amount of funds in looking for the interactome and different synapses and the high activity of the brain. While, as you said, neurodegenerative disease are still going to be with us, and not only going to be with us, but going to increase in incidence. And the predictions say that if we are all going to live to 120, nobody will know his or her age at that time, because we should all, and the idea will be, and we still insist that most of the neurodegenerative diseases are diseases of protein quality control that can be solved in relatively simple cell biological approaches, because we know a lot about aggregation, we know about a lot of protein quality control, but there is no concerted effort in order to go there. So, as you said, if part of the big money that is going to the big brain project will go to solve this problem, it will be a great benefit. Now, I just want one single...
When I was told, just one,
okay,
since I was making the comment, when I was told that there are more than 2,000 trials going on, concomitant trials of different types of combination of drugs going on cancer, I said it must be that we don't know what we are doing. Because we're combining anything with anything, we are doing more and more sophisticated medicine, we are doing more and more sophisticated research, and we are not solving the problems that we should solve before we go into that and have a burden of disease which is actually manageable. We will end up in a situation in which we cannot pay for the medicine that we require.
Okay, thank you. We are already 5 minutes or more over the time. I think we should have now 20 minutes break before starting for the last session, and I want to thank everyone who contributed to the session for the questions and the answers. Thank you.